Hello again, guys. In this episode of Learn the TOEFL the Easy Way with Teacher Fish, instead of our usual lesson video about TOEFL question types, we will reveal the secrets of earning a perfect score in the integrated writing task. But before we begin unveiling the secrets to your success, let us first look into how an integrated writing response is scored. Basically, an integrated writing response is scored from a scale of 0 to 5, with 5 being the highest. Also, when grading your response, TOEFL raters will look into two major aspects: language use and content. So let us begin our lesson on the first major variable of your score, which is content. Now, the very first requirement when it comes to content is to be able to successfully select important information from both the reading and the lecture. Remember, in a typical 4-paragraph passage, you must at least have 4 important details on paper. The main idea and the 3 key points are major details. Likewise, the lecture must have its main idea statement, 3 key points, and supporting details. That is, each key point from the lecture must have a supporting detail. However, our lesson will no longer focus on the how-tos, and the what-ares, as in how to determine a main idea or key points and what are these details, because by now you have to be able to note-take of these details with no sweat. But if still, you are having problems with figuring out details, I have a video about it entitled, TOEFL Writing, Integrated Task, so please watch it on my channel. And so, assuming that you have all necessary details at hand, the next thing to do is to accurately present all the information with regard to the prompt or question. I mean, if the prompt asks you to show a support relationship between the sources or a contrast between the two, then you must be able to clearly express this in your response. Another thing that the raters would look at is how organized the information in your response is. You have to be sure that the way you write your response is easy to follow or understand. For example, if in your response you started writing about the reading's details first, then all the paragraphs should be written in the same manner. Conversely, if you started presenting lecture details first, then it has to be uniform until the last paragraph. By the way, there is no difference between writing about the reading details first or writing the lecture details first, as long as they are well organized. To better illustrate the point, here is an example of a strong response from one of the students who recently joined my class. Notice that all the paragraphs started with the details from the reading, then followed by the ones from the lecture. This is exactly what I am talking about. Still talking about organization, be sure that your details are in proper places. What I mean is, key point 1 of the reading, for example, must be matched with key point 1 of the lecture, and the rest follows. Never interchange the order of key points when writing your response. This may even correspond to major deductions. Now, as mentioned earlier, the second variable of your score is language use. Let us divide language into 2 subcategories: grammar and vocabulary. And so, in the aspect of grammar, needless to say that this is where your technical know-how will be tested. From basic grammar rules like subject-verb agreement to sentence composition. As a teacher for many years, I find that the easiest to check in any writing response is verb usage. Starting off with subject-verb agreement. Always be sure that the verb agrees with the subject in terms of number. If the subject is singular, then the verb has to be singular too. If the subject is plural, then the verb has to also be in its plural form. Let us take into example the following sentences. The first one says, Teacher Fish teaches the TOEFL. As you can see, Teacher Fish, which is the subject of the sentence, is only 1 in number, so the verb teach is in singular form, which is teaches. Conversely, in the sentence, students study the TOEFL very seriously. The subject, students, is in its plural form, so the verb has to agree with it, and be in its plural form as well. The next thing that the TOEFL raters will check is verb tense. Aside from it being one of the easiest to catch, it is also one of the most basic rules of grammar. So be very careful with your verb tenses. There are parts of your response that you have to be uniform with verb tenses. If you started the response using the present tense, then until you finish writing your response, the tense has to be present. Let us look into these examples again. So if I wrote, both the reading and the lecture discuss, then in my other paragraphs I will write, the reading indicates, and the professor mentions. Notice that the verbs discuss, indicates, and mentions are all in the present tense. By the way, when writing your response, it is always best to use the present tense of verbs when attributing the sources of information. Needless to say that for details that were provided by the two sources, the tenses of the original statements have to be followed. Subject-verb agreement and verb tenses are just the basic aspects of your response when it comes to grammar. However, as basic they may seem, they also command the biggest deduction when violations are committed multiple times. So check carefully these two areas. So the next thing that would significantly contribute to your rating or score is the use of varied sentence patterns or styles. Sure, the prompt would tell you to briefly summarize the points of the lecture and the reading, but it does not tell you to limit your style to just one sentence pattern. Try to showcase your versatility in composing sentences. For example, instead of simply saying, the professor challenges the reading's claim and mentions that dinosaurs gone extinct because a big ball of fire collided with the Earth millions of years ago, which is the typical way of writing a statement for an integrated writing response, you may change the sentence style and say, in contrast, a big ball of fire that collided with the Earth millions of years ago, according to the professor, was the cause of dinosaur extinction. By doing this, you have a big chance of earning a good impression from the TOEFL raters that you can make use of the language in different ways, which in turn might translate into a higher rating. However, when altering your sentence style, be sure that the core meaning of the original sentence is kept or included in your version. Moving on, another contributor to a higher rating is the use of paraphrases or restatements. Again, remember that an integrated writing response, even if all needed details are included, would not earn a perfect score, if the information is simply copied accordingly to how it is presented by the sources. And so, as you may already know, there are three basic ways to paraphrase a sentence. The first is to change key words in a sentence. This method affects the second subcategory of language use, vocabulary. In a good way, of course. This is your chance to show how wide your working vocabulary is. Now, aside from it having a positive effect on the vocabulary aspect of your score, it is very useful in situations where you have to paraphrase short or simple sentences. And so, when using this style, try to use related words or phrases, including synonyms or even antonyms. So for example, instead of saying, for organization, write it as, in order to organize. Or instead of, people at the age of 50, say, 50-year-old people. Now for more effective paraphrasing using this technique, pay special attention to the key words in the original sentence and then replace them. Let us have this sample sentence again. The original sentence says, Australia is the world's smallest continent. The key words are, Australia, world's smallest, and continent. As a rule, if a key word is a proper noun, in which in our sentence's case is Australia, you do not have to replace it with a different term or name. And so, we now focus on our next key word, which is worlds. It can be replaced with the word planets, globes, or even earths. Next, if the word does not have a direct synonym or that you are unsure, leave it out. In the case of smallest, if we replace it with the word tiny or tiniest, it might indicate a different meaning, so better not to change it. Anyway, we still have the word continent, which can be substituted with the word large landmass or simply landmass. And so our new version of the sentence will look like, Australia is the globe's smallest landmass. The second paraphrasing style is changing sentence structure. Now we somewhat already have an idea of this, since it was mentioned earlier in the video when we discussed about sentence style. But then again, let us talk about it in more details. Changing sentence structure is especially useful in longer sentences or sentences that have more than one part. For instance, a sentence that was formed by combining two independent clauses using a conjunction or connector. Or even a two-part sentence that has a main clause and a subordinating clause, made as one, again with the use of a conjunction. So in this situation, you have an opportunity to change the structure of the sentence by simply reordering or rearranging the positions of the clauses. For example, if the original sentence is, Australia is the world's smallest continent, but it is one of the most fascinating. As you can see, it has two parts. The first is, Australia is the world's smallest continent. Then the second part, which is, it is one of the most fascinating. And the use of the connector, but. So if you intend to change the sentence structure, your new sentence may look like, although one of the most fascinating, Australia is the world's smallest continent. Moving on to the last basic style of paraphrasing, it is simply a combination of the first two, changing keywords and sentence structure. Like the second style, this method is extra useful with longer sentences. It is also more effective than the second style since it is a much improved version of the original sentence. However, the difference between the two styles is the time spent constructing the sentence. It is quite obvious that paraphrasing style 3 demands the longest time despite being very effective. And so, if you have the luxury of time, anyway you have 20 minutes at hand, which is more than enough, I suggest making use of paraphrasing style 3. Now, how do we use changing key words and sentence structure? First, let us have the original sentence again. Australia is the world's smallest continent, but it is one of the most fascinating. To accurately employ the style, you must first replace the key words in the sentence with related vocabulary or phrases. So the key words in the sentence are Australia, world's smallest continent, most fascinating. Australia is a proper noun, so let us not touch it. Worlds may be replaced with globes, while the word continent may be substituted with the word landmass. Finally, the phrase most fascinating may again be replaced with the phrase most interesting. So now, the sentence is written as Australia is the globe's smallest landmass, but it is one of the most interesting. After changing the key words in the original sentence, your next task is to restructure it. Taking into example what we did in the second paraphrasing style, wherein the original sentence is written as Australia is the world's smallest continent, but is one of the most fascinating. Then the new sentence is, although one of the most fascinating, Australia is the world's smallest continent. So when changing the structure, there won't be any difference between paraphrasing styles 2 and 3. However, remember, you must combine the first two styles. And so, your version of paraphrasing style 3 sentence should look like this. Although one of the most interesting, Australia is the globe's smallest landmass. So by doing these adjustments with the statements in your response and combining them with the earlier discussed strategies concerning content, you are pretty much closer to getting a perfect score, or at least a very high score. But wait, not just yet. There are still a few things you can do to assure yourself of getting a perfect score from the task. A typical integrated writing response is comprised of 4 paragraphs, an intro and 3 body paragraphs. Also, remember that the paragraphs will look identical in terms of structure. And so, there is a high chance that some expressions will be repeated. Among the commonly used terms in a response are source words, specifically the reading and lecture. From the introduction to the last paragraph, the source words will be used for at least 4 or 5 times. So it is best that you have word substitutes for them. Now for reading, you may use the words article, passage, and text. While for the lecture, you may use the words professor, instructor, lecturer, or even speaker. Next are the verbs that follow our source words. Instead of saying, the reading suggests, and the article suggests, make use of word substitutes like indicates, specifies, recommends, or proposes. As for the verb says, which commonly follows the source word professor, use words such as mentions, points out, presumes, or talks about. As for verbs that show support or contrast relationship between the two sources, try to alter them too. For instance, you may say, support, agrees, accord, or assent, instead of only using support all throughout. In the same manner, instead of saying contrast in all the paragraphs, why not use disagree, refute, challenge, or oppose? Another frequently repeated expressions in a response are transitions. Remember that the reading and the lecture have two possible relationships. So in a situation where the sources agree with each other, make use of transitions like, similarly, likewise, in the same manner, or in accordance. Whereas, in a contrast relationship, use however, on the other hand, conversely, or in contrast. Again, remember that a major benefit of using word substitute is that it increases your chances of earning a higher mark on the aspect of vocabulary. Keep in mind that vocabulary is a subcomponent of language use, which is a major variable of your overall score. While the techniques shared ensures you have a perfect score or at least a high rating, there is still one circumstance that may pull your score lower. It is when you are having problems with word count. Again, an integrated writing response must be between 150 and 225 words. The minimum word requirement is often not an issue, especially if the response contains all the necessary details from the reading and the lecture. And besides, you have the optional conclusion to save you from falling short of words. However, often the problem arises when a response exceeds the 225 limit. Now, you might have heard of people saying, "It is fine to exceed by a few words, it won't harm your score." While this may be true, my take on this, and is what I always tell my students, it is always better to be on the safe side. I mean, the 225 maximum limit is there for a reason. And so, if you need to cut down on word count, first thing to do is to replace transitions or expressions that would command a higher word count. For example, instead of using on the other hand, which obviously counts as 4, why not just use however, which would only count as 1? Instead of using, one reason is that, which again counts as 4, use the transition, firstly. But what if after replacing expressions with shorter ones, I still have an issue with word count? Well, if this is the case, try to sacrifice the common topic statement. Remember that its primary function is to increase your word count and that the other is just to add flavor to your response. So in a situation where you need to cut down your words, by all means erase it. Don't worry, because doing so won't harm the quality of your response. But again, what if after doing so, you still have word count issue? In this situation, you have to carefully check the details in your response. Did you not repeat a statement you just mentioned? If all details are okay, try to simplify your sentences by using shorter phrases or structures. Taking into example again the phrase, "in order to organize," may be written as "for organization," and the phrase, "people at the age of 50," may be simplified as 50-year-old people. By the way, when simplifying phrases, it would be better to try doing it with reading details first, since they are given less preference in an integrated task than the lecture details. And so guys, before we end our lesson, let us first have a recap of the ways you can increase your chances of earning a perfect score from the integrated writing task of the TOEFL. Starting with content, be sure that you accurately take notes of details from both sources, organize the paragraphs in the response well, and observe consistency. As for language use, for the grammar part, pay attention to subject-verb agreement and verb tenses, use varied sentence structures, and make use of your paraphrasing styles. For vocabulary, make use of word substitutes and varied transitions or expressions. Finally, let me share with you a sample of an integrated writing response that was written by one of my students who recently took the TOEFL. His overall score was 112, and in the writing section he got a score of 28. You may take a screenshot of it, so you can use it as a template, and also have the chance of earning the same, if not a higher score in integrated writing task. Alright, we have again reached the end of our lesson video about how you earn a perfect score in integrated writing task. Start incorporating the things I shared with your integrated writing responses, and I guarantee a significant improvement on your scores. If you have any questions, comments or suggestions, please leave them on the comment section and I will do my best to respond to them as soon as I can. I have also uploaded other TOEFL lesson videos and TOEFL exercises, so check out my channel. Please do not forget to subscribe, press like and hit the notification bell so that you'd get informed every time I upload new lesson videos or practice exercises. You may also share this video with your friends and other test takers you know, so that they too can achieve their TOEFL success. And always remember, the TOEFL is not difficult if you know what to do. With that, see you again on the next episode of Learn the TOEFL the Easy Way with Teacher Fish.